Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
We are live. Well, we're live in the comments, and this is pre-recorded as always. But so I'm Sabine K. Bergman. If you haven't met me already, it's nice to meet you, Internet.
And I'm Savani Babu. We're the co-founders of Hidden Compass, and we are joined today by the wonderful Morgan Tilton, who is joining us from Colorado.
Yes, Crested Butte, Colorado.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. We're gonna tell you guys all about Morgan in a second, but we're gonna give people a little bit of time to join. And so I actually wanted to chat. In your bio, we noticed that you mentioned a love of stargazing and the cosmos and shooting stars. And so I wanted to ask, Morgan, what's your favorite or your most memorable stargazing experience?
That's a tough question to answer. I would feel like I was bragging to say that I grew up in a place where I could see the stars crystal clear, that thousands of really dense sky full of stars on most nights. And that was in Southwest Colorado, at my mom's house in Bayfield, and at my dad's house in Telluride. But to be more specific, in the last couple of years, I had an opportunity to start researching and writing about dark sky tourism. And I learned about this community, Westcliff, which is in Southern Colorado. And they've really been a community that's pioneered this dark sky tourism. So a couple of summers ago, my partner, Eric, and I found this little rental called Rancho Bandito. And we found it through this new website called Dark Skies Vacations. So all of these stayovers really specialize in some kind of dark sky element. And it turns out that this architect of this house and carriage house, his name is Jim Bradburn. So he's an architect by trade, but an expert of the sky just by his passion. And he had created this beautiful property with it was a sanctuary with a labyrinth and all of these pathways and a meditation chapel and an observatory with one of the most impressive telescopes in the country. So, as well as a greenhouse. So his whole philosophy as he's walking us around his property is inner and outer reflection and how we are connected to the sky. And that by way of studying the stars, we're just reminded of how precious life is. And he was one of the pioneers of this movement in Westcliff. He was the president of this organization called Dark Skies of the Wet Mountain Valley for 10 years. So the whole time I was there, I was just like deeply meditating on the sky and listening to him, like sitting with him at dinner, just like listening to him talk about the sky. The irony was we got a snowstorm in true Colorado fashion. So when we sat with him in his observatory, we couldn't actually look through the telescope, but he had incredible photos and went through this analog and just taught us about all these planets and constellations. And I just think that opportunity is so special. It's available to anyone who wants to go and stay there. And the knowledge that he can share is just really beautiful.
That's fantastic. It sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah, too bad with the snowstorm, but this is what chasing dark skies is like. You know, it's very weather dependent.
Yes.
And it's so cool that people are into dark sky conservation now. It's definitely, I see that popping up a lot more. I've written a piece about it. Savani's written a piece about it. I think for my stargazing experience, I'll pick one that happened before I didn't even knew what dark sky conservation was. When I was 19 years old, I moved to South America and I was living in Bolivia at the time. And I went to the salt flats. So it's the largest salt flats in the world. I think it's like 10,000 square kilometers of salt crystals. And it's at high elevation. There's no light pollution whatsoever. And I was a little delirious when I got there because, kind of a long story, I had food poisoning. There was social unrest and I had to bribe my way to get through a road blockade that later turned violent. But I ended up in the salt flats. And I remember walking out at night and looking up, and it was breathtaking. It's like you were saying, Morgan, about this feeling of just being in awe of the universe and and your place there. And I've so wanted to go back to the Bolivian salt flats because I was there during the dry season, and during the rainy season, it's even more spectacular. As Savani can say, because she's actually been there during the rainy season.
I have. And actually, I do have just a really memorable stargazing experience also on the Bolivian salt flats. So this is a big part of my work as well. As a photographer and a writer, I do a lot of dark sky conservation work and a lot of dark sky photography. And we took a trip with some other photographers and a couple friends. We went to the salt flats. We were there during the rainy season. And when you're near Uyuni now, there is a fair bit of light pollution. And so it wasn't really that dark, but we went to the northern part of the flats where you don't have any light pollution. And we went out one night, and it was, you had the sky, which was remarkable, but because of the water, all the stars were reflecting in the water. And so it was like walking on stars and walking into the stars above and below. And it was this feeling of, this is the closest I will ever feel to like being out in the universe and off of this planet. And it was remarkable. But in terms of, I think truly some of the best stargazing I've ever had, you know, I've chased these dark skies all over the world, and so much so that I chased them out into the middle of the ocean. And on a sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic, we were navigating from Key West to Bermuda. And so somewhere in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, and you just look up and there is no light anywhere except for what's coming from the stars. And it was just remarkable. And it was a good memory from a trip that similarly did not, I mean, that trip came to an abrupt end shortly thereafter, but it was a great moment.
I'm assuming you have photos of both of these moments?
Well, I definitely have photos from the salt flats, but on the sailboat, taking photos of the sky was not really doable.
Yeah, too much motion.
Yeah, way too much motion. But yeah, no, I have photos from the salt flats, and actually they ended up in a Hidden Compass piece a while back. So
okay. I think I remember seeing that.
Yeah. But yes, dark skies are amazing. And also amazing is the story that you wrote for us, which we're excited to talk about. How's that for a segue?
Good segue. Yes, A River of Unknowns is the title. It's in our Human and Nature department. And Morgan, who's with us, wrote the story. Morgan is an award-winning journalist. Lots of awards, actually. I think you have 11 North American Travel Journalists Association awards. So yeah, not too shabby. So you're a creative writer, you're a reporter, you've written for over 70 publications, but who's counting? I think Outside Magazine is in there, Men's Journal is in there. And is it 5280 or 5280?
5280.
Okay. All right. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't actually had to say it out loud before.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mile High City.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then you describe yourself as being curious about people, environments, and the cosmos, which pretty much covers it, I think. And you're a contributing editor for MST Magazine, so you're very busy. And you also happen to write a story for Hidden Compass, so thanks for finding the time.
Yes.
Thanks for working with me.
Definitely. And it's such a beautiful story about the landscape and the cryosphere of Vancouver Island, where you immersed yourself in the snow-coated mountains, the coastlines, infamous waves, and wrote about climate change's impacts on the world, scientific breakthrough that helps us measure those impacts, but also what it all means for our individual identities too. So what was it that pulled you to this region and made you want to experience all of it?
Well, the initial draw for me was the rarity of being able to explore the mountains and the snowpack, and also explore the ocean in a very short proximity. So this entire concept of being able to ski or snowboard and then go surfing and connecting with the landscape in that way. But I mean, Vancouver Island is even richer than that, because in between the two locations, there are just countless waterways, ancient forests. There's a really rich Indigenous history, First Nations rather, history of preserving that forest. And just, it was incredible to experience just every level of that, between the tops of the mountains and the lowest altitude at the ocean.
Yeah, that's what pulled us to the story as an editorial team, is this idea of seeing water in all its forms, ice, liquid, and vapor. And this is a story that follows these connections and has a narrator who's pulled to try to fold herself into those connections. And, you know, so many of our pitches will be a writer who's picking one place or one aspect of a landscape to experience, but we're always excited when we get pitches or submissions from people who want to go beyond that and explore multiple facets of a place. And you definitely were a writer who wanted to do that.
Yeah, and I was also excited, because I was excited just to work with you, because I think at that point we'd already connected on social media. And so I was familiar with your work, and I was really excited when this pitch came in to get a chance to work with you as well. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Wow, that means a lot. I was really excited to work with both of you.
Thank you.
I had been following your publication since Jamie Moye, who is someone who, she used to live in Boulder, and I used to live in Denver. So since she wrote for you, I think it was the second issue. But yeah, I've been following.
Third or the, I mean, it all kind of blurs together at the beginning.
Yeah,
That's all blurred together.
We'll have to drop Jamie's story in the comments.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure to work with Jamie too. And I love being connected to the different journalist networks through this company. And one of my favorite things to do as a publisher is to follow a journalist and their work, and then to eventually get to publish them at some point, which has happened. We've been lucky, so we've been able to do that multiple times.
We have been very fortunate. Yes.
So I want to ask, because when this story first came to us, it was a story that was focused largely on the landscape, which is fascinating. But then it became a story about identity. So where did that thread or that narrative about identity come from?
I think as we're experiencing the landscape and considering how it's changing and evolving, and how it's evolving alongside people and as a byproduct of people, it's just natural to question your place and your role and your influence in that evolution, especially with regards to climate change. And if you have a relationship where you realize, like, the environment's really special and I want more people to experience this in the future, I don't want it to end with me, and you don't want these natural resources to dwindle, then it comes full circle thinking about climate change and what can I do in my everyday to make a difference with that.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I love to see come through in the piece, because there are so many different types of impacts of climate change, and the impact on our identity and our place in the world it's a huge one. It's kind of a difficult one to parse out, but it's definitely something that resonated with me.
Yeah, and it is hard to sort of take that on when you're looking at a problem like climate change, where the effect on environments and societies and entire, locations is so drastic. And so to be able to turn that inward for a second and think about individual identity within all of that, while still acknowledging and respecting all of the bigger sort of consequences of it, and to do that seamlessly as you did, it's a task, and it's hard, but it works so well in this story.
Thank you.
So you've kind of already started to touch on it, but what made you really want to tell this story and share this story? Because it's one thing to have this experience and to want to bring it to other people, but what made you want to tell it by showing all of that interconnectedness and in the way that you did?
I think, one factor is that in growing up in the mountains, I have this really perhaps novel window into watching the snowpack feed into the rivers, quite literally. Like, the snowpack is right up there.
Yeah.
And it comes down, and then I know when when the snow is going to melt, and I can go, stand at paddleboarding. So I'm watching that annual cycle.
Mhm.
And people don't I'm actually in a climate change course right now. I decided to join one with Yale University. It's climate change health. I joined after finishing the story. So it's a 3-part class, and there are people from all over the world in it. So a lot of my other health practitioners that are in the class with me, they're not talking about the snowpack and how that relates to water and water drought. Snow drought affects water drought. It goes in a complete cycle. So part of the fluid picture I wanted to paint was that this is all connected every day of the year. It doesn't ever end or begin. It's this cycle. And that to just beg the question of how are you connecting with the earth and at what time? And that the other piece of the story is that I'm trying to elevate one form of adaptation strategy that's been introduced in this pioneering community and among the scientists there, which is really exciting, because when we can add science to our adaptation strategies through metrics, then we can take that model and reapply it in other locations, then we can introduce even more strategy around preservation. So I think that's one issue with moving forward climate change, is that it's in a very nascent stage as far as data collection and also proven models of how we can adapt. And each adaptation strategy needs to be tailored to that community and what they need. But I think we have a lot to learn from the scientists in the story.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I liked about this piece, is that I think so often we feel like we're moving towards this precipice where things are getting more and more unstable, but then at the same time, we are also getting better at measuring what's happening, and the introduction of new technology. It's such a cool juxtaposition to see, this is a piece where you're going into the unknown, you're going into the unfamiliar, and all of humankind is doing that in a way, but also you brought in this narrative of a researcher who's working with groundbreaking technology. So you have the hope alongside that.
Yeah.
We like to ask, why is this a story you want to tell? But then we also ask, why is this a story that we need to hear? And you've touched on this a little bit more, but for those who haven't yet been convinced or haven't read it and aren't swept away yet, why do you think that this piece is a piece that people need to read?
I've been reflecting a lot on this universal experience of the pandemic, and we've actually talked about a lot of these parallels in this course that I'm in right now between the pandemic and climate change. These two instances are the only two that are universal to all humankind across the earth, where every single person has been impacted by those two things. And there's no one that won't continue to be affected by climate change as we move forward. So the best way that we can adapt with the changing landscape and with these changing weather patterns that are becoming more exasperated is to all work together. And it's going to take time. Hopefully it happens sooner than later, though.
Yeah, well, we're definitely seeing some monumental efforts on both fronts.
Definitely. We also like to talk about our hopes for a story. This is kind of where we like to talk about what we hope people take away from the story. And Sabine, I want to start with you. What is your hope as a publisher for this story?
Well, this is interesting because we already kind of touched on this, but yeah. So my hope for the story as a publisher is that it inspires people to really take to heart the range of impacts of climate change. The impacts that go beyond the tangible and into like the psychological, maybe even the psychic, if you could call it that, impacts, and this idea of how it impacts us on so many levels, and how we confront that, to challenge ourselves to think about what it means for our identities and our connections to landscapes, because that is so important and it's so hard. It's impossible to measure in a way, but it is so necessary to talk about. And so that's what I hope for this story, is that people read it and they think about how that range of climate change impacts can really hit them. And as you said, Morgan, everyone who lives on Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I certainly share that hope for the story, but I think also one of the things that I really hope that people take away from this is that it helps expand our views of the interconnectedness of the environment and the world, looking at the environment, as a web that is all that every piece is connected to the other and it all affects everything. And I think about how far we've come in that journey as a species, as humans. I think about, the time period when you had Descartes and others who thought that, animals and all of that had no conscience, that they were just robots essentially. And then you went into von Humboldt and Darwin, and this idea that things were connected, and we're still on that journey of understanding how closely everything is connected. And so I think my hope for that story is that it advances that journey.
That's a great hope. I love that. Morgan, what's your greatest hope for this story?
Well, I just want to say, I love what you said about the psychological and the psych impacts. And there are a lot of studies going on right now about the mental health impacts of climate change.
Right.
And they're chronic and they're long term. So, and it's hard to track that, but it's happening. And so I hope that this story in a way sparks that curiosity and that love for someone to connect with nature in their own way, whether that's going to Vancouver Island to experience it themselves, or just going and trying those sports in their backyard, or just going on a walk in the woods. And I also hope that people realize that climate change, effectively addressing climate change doesn't need to be rigid and brutal. We can all help in small ways that incrementally add up, whether that's just driving your car one day less a week, or going out and voting for a politician in your community or nationally who supports environmental initiatives and policies, or electing Indigenous leaders because they have a long lineage of caring for these landscapes and they have been really successful at it. So we should elevate those voices. And I think that people just get bogged down with the big picture, but we need to just take small pieces and all just try to move forward with it.
That's a great hope. Yeah. I love that. I love working with journalists who, think about their pieces in the context of a global conversation, which is what we like to do as a publisher. So thank you for that, Morgan. If people are excited about your work, where else can they go and learn and read more?
My Instagram is a great place to check out what I'm working on. I try to share a link to the stories that go live on there. And then my website is my online portfolio, morgantilton.com.
Wonderful. Right. We'll drop the links in the comments and in the description as well, so that people can go check out more of your work. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic to chat with you. I want to remind everyone too that all of our stories have a fundraising campaign associated with them. So Morgan's story has a fundraising campaign. So if you read the story and you're excited about it and you want to support more of her work and more stories like this, you can make a donation to that campaign. We split the proceeds 50-50, in addition to what we pay Morgan as a journalist who wrote a story for us. So it's a chance to support the story, support Morgan, support Hidden Compass and the work that we do as well. And so we hope that you will do that.
Yes. And for those who have already done so, thank you so much. We all appreciate your support, and we're excited to see people participating in journalism in a way that we haven't really seen before. So thank you for doing that. And check out more of Morgan's work. Check out the Instagram handle that she mentioned, and also go to her profile page on Hidden Compass and continue to see what she does. I'm excited to see what you do next, Morgan.
Oh, thank you so much. And my Instagram handle, which I think I forgot to mention, it's Mo Tilton, MOTILTON.
Okay. Great. I thought you had mentioned it, but instead I just prompted you to, which worked out perfectly.
Same end result. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Morgan, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you next week.